The first time James Carter saw her, she was standing beneath the rusted awning of Whitmore's bookstore, shaking rain off her umbrella and laughing like the world hadn't taught her how to be quiet yet. The sound stopped him mid-step. Not because it was loud, but because it wasn't just soft enough to make him look, just real enough to make him stay. Ashbury was a small Kentucky town that didn't offer much more than muddy roads, secondhand diners, and a post office that still used hand stamps. James had lived there his entire life, 24 years shaped by dirt roads, grease-stained hands, and the steady hum of the family garage his father built and left behind. He didn't expect change, didn't seek it. But she changed the air. Her name was Emily Grace Whitmore, 22, newly returned from Lexington after 2 years of college and a heartbreak she never talked about. Her father owned the bookstore, and when her mother got sick, she came home to help. She shelved romance novels and history texts with equal care, humming under her breath and wearing too many sweaters in a town that never quite reached winter. They met properly a week later. Her old Corolla sputtered to a stop outside McMillan's auto, and James came out with a wrench in his hand and oil on his cheek. She smiled at him like she already knew something he didn't. "Brakes are shot," she said. "So is my patience." He nodded, didn't say much. But when he handed her the receipt later, their fingers brushed. She didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head and asked, "Do you always look this serious, or is it just Mondays?" It should have ended there, but the next day she brought muffins. Said it was thanks for the rush job, even though he hadn't rushed. Then Friday, she came back again, this time just to sit on the bench outside and read. By the second week, they were having coffee at Baker's Brew, a place with chipped mugs and creaky floors that smelled like cinnamon and something older. James didn't fall in love like people do in books. He didn't dream in colors or write her poems. He just started listening more, smiling more, letting his hand slow down when she was near. Emily, on the other hand, loved like a match quick to light, impossible to ignore. She laughed at his dry jokes. She walked beside him on the railroad tracks behind the town, balancing on one rail and asking if he'd catch her if she fell. He said yes. And minute dot, by the time summer spilled into October, they were inseparable. She'd sneak into the garage just to sit on the counter and talk about books he'd never read. He'd walk her home and wait until she turned on the porch light before heading back. Everyone in town noticed except maybe James. He was too busy memorizing the shape of her smile. Then came the letter dot. It arrived on a Thursday morning, sealed and government stamped, offering James a deployment position with the National Guard. He'd applied over a year ago, back when things felt different. Back when his dreams stretched further than Ashbury's borders. He held the letter for an entire day before telling her. They were sitting in her backyard, watching the fireflies come out. He didn't say much, just handed her the envelope and looked away. She read it twice, then a third time. And when she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but her voice didn't shake. "When?" "3 weeks," he said. She nodded, then smiled in that way she did when she was scared but didn't want to show it. "I'll wait," she whispered, "no matter how long." He kissed her that night for the first time. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hesitant. It was quiet, reverent, like he was memorizing her lips in case memory was all he'd have left. She held onto his collar and whispered things against his jaw, things like, "Come back to me," and "Don't forget my face." In the weeks that followed, Ashbury felt sharper. Every road they drove together, every booth they sat in, every look held longer than usual. James tried to act normal, but he couldn't stop counting the days. Emily stopped saying, "When you're back," and started saying, "Until then." Caleb, James's younger brother, came around more often. He'd always been the talker, the charmer, a year younger but louder in every room. He joked to Emily that he'd keep her company while James was gone. She smiled politely but didn't laugh. The night before James left, they sat on the back of his truck under the stars. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, she said, "What if something happens? It won't." "But if it does, it won't," he repeated, firmer now. "I'll come back, and you'll still be here." She nodded like she believed him, but her fingers dug into his as if trying to carve herself into his skin. The next morning, he stood by the bus stop with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a picture of her tucked inside his jacket. She pressed a folded letter into his hand and said, "Don't read it until you're really missing me." He boarded the bus without looking back. He didn't trust himself not to cry as it pulled away. Emily stood there with her arms crossed against the cold, her eyes never leaving the back of his head until he disappeared around the bend the wind picked up. Leaves danced at her feet, and somewhere in the distance a church bell rang. James didn't cry the first night overseas. He didn't flinch when the first mortar shell cracked the horizon or when the desert wind sanded his face raw. But he cried the first time he unfolded Emily's letter. It was simple, 3 paragraphs, no flourishes, just her. She told him about the new kitten she adopted, about how Caleb was stopping by to fix the squeaky screen door, about how much she missed him. At the bottom, she wrote, "I'm counting the stars. I hope you're under the same sky." He read it 12 times. Her letters became ritual, every Tuesday, like clockwork. Sometimes long, sometimes short, always in her soft, looping handwriting. They carried pieces of ashberry inside, the smell of ink, the way she curled her G's. He tucked them under his pillow, read them in foxholes, whispered her words like prayer. At first, James wrote back every few days. Descriptions of sunrises over sand dunes, the stray dog that kept following the unit, the way her photo looked taped above his bunk. But as missions grew longer and weeks blurred into silence, the gaps between letters stretched. Some were lost. Some arrived months late, wrinkled and rain-stained. Back home, Emily stared at an empty mailbox and tried not to count the days. She still stopped by Baker's Brew every Friday, still sat in the back of Whitmore's bookstore tracing the spines of novels she wasn't reading. She wore his flannel to sleep, even in summer. Told herself silence was normal. Told herself he was coming back. Caleb started coming around more. He was different than James Louder. Easier with words, more comfortable in rooms with other people. He fixed the screen door like he promised. Then the porch light, then the leaky sink. Always offering, never asking. He had grown up in the same house as James, but grief and proximity had shaped him differently. Where James built walls, Caleb reached through them. Emily tried not to notice how easy he made things, how he listened without looking away, how he didn't flinch when she cried on the back steps one night after getting another empty mailbox. "I'm sorry," she'd said, wiping at her face. "I don't know what I'm doing." "You're waiting," he said. "That's doing enough." He didn't touch her, just sat beside her until the porch light flickered out. That fall, James's mother died. A stroke in the middle of the night. Caleb called the base. James was granted emergency leave and flown back within 72 hours. He stepped off the bus like a ghost, thinner, eyes shadowed, jaw tight. The town looked smaller somehow, worn down by time. Caleb met him at the station. Emily waited outside the church. When James saw her, something inside him cracked relief, fear, disbelief. She looked the same but softer, like a painting left too long in sunlight. She hugged him too tight, like she wasn't sure he was real. He held her close, but kept one hand in his pocket. That night, they sat on the Carter family porch, the same steps where they used to dream about leaving. Now he'd been halfway across the world, and she barely moved. "Everything's different," he said. She nodded. "It's been almost 4 years." He looked at her then, noticing things he hadn't before. The way she avoided his eyes, the careful distance in her body. He wanted to ask if she still loved him, but the question stuck in his throat. So he said nothing. He stayed for the funeral, for the sorting of old boxes and papers, for the empty refrigerator and the heavy silence in his childhood room that Emily visited twice. Once to bring soup, once to bring the cat they didn't kiss. Not even a hug goodbye. Before he left, Caleb said, "She's still hurting, you know?" "I know. She waited a long time." James looked at his brother, then passed him toward the porch where Emily once whispered promises against his shoulder. So did I. Back in the desert, the world felt louder, angrier. He buried himself in his work, ignored the letters that slowed to a trickle. Eventually they stopped. Months later, he received one more, a short note. Her handwriting smaller, tighter. "I hope you're safe. I hope you know I tried. I waited as long as I could, but I can't do this alone anymore." There was no return address. He didn't reply. He couldn't. Back home, Emily stood outside her father's bookstore, holding Caleb's hand. It wasn't romantic, yet not exactly, but it was something. A beginning built on silence and shared waiting. Caleb never rushed her, never said James's name unless she did first. Winter passed into spring. James sent one last package to Ashbury, a box of trinkets he'd collected, a carved necklace, a photo of the stray dog, a worn notebook filled with unsent letters. He didn't include a note, just the things she never saw. Emily opened the box on a rainy afternoon. She read every page, tracing each word like a wound. Then she tucked the notebook into the back of her closet, behind coats she no longer wore. Caleb found her crying that night, but didn't ask why. Instead, he held her hand, and she didn't let go. The war ended. James came home again, but this time, nothing was waiting. The morning James returned for good, Ashbury was quiet in that strange, in-between way. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the air tasted like it might. He stepped off the Greyhound bus carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a worn photo of Emily tucked into his wallet. The town looked smaller, grayer. He'd been gone almost 7 years, long enough for storefronts to change hands, long enough for promises to fade. He didn't tell anyone he was coming. Just bought a ticket, sat in the back row, and stared out. The window like answers might be written in the blur between telephone poles. His boots hit the sidewalk with the weight of years. He passed Macmillan's auto, now boarded up. Baker's Brew still stood, its windows fogged with steam. He paused outside, considered going in, but kept walking. Too many ghosts in that place. Too many memories folded into every cracked floorboard. Turned the corner near the church, where the steps rose like a stage, worn smooth by decades of weddings, funerals, and whispered confessions. That's when he saw them. Emily, in white, a veil lifted by wind. Her hand in Caleb's. They weren't posing for photos. They weren't surrounded by family. Just the two of them, standing alone on the church steps like it belonged to them. James froze. Not out of shock, but recognition. He dreamed this moment 100 different ways. In some, she saw him and ran. In others, she cried. But this was silence. This was stillness. This was real. She didn't see him at first. Her eyes were on Caleb, her smile small, private, but something in her shifted. A tilt of the head, a flicker of doubt, and then their eyes met. It lasted less. Then a heartbeat. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, carrying everything he'd never said, every word unsent, every year lost. She didn't run, she didn't speak. Just looked at him like he was a story she'd once read and almost remembered. Then she turned back to Caleb, slipped her hand into his, and walked into the church. James stood outside for another minute, maybe more. Long enough for the bells to start, long enough to hear muffled music. Then he turned away and walked back down the hill, snow starting to fall. Didn't cry. Not then, not until later, when he sat alone in the attic of his childhood home, holding the last letter she ever sent. He'd read it before creased at the folds, ink smudged from fingerprints, but this time he read it out loud. I'm sorry, James. I waited. I tried. But I couldn't hold on to someone who wasn't here. You were always the one I loved. Maybe you always will be, but love, it doesn't survive in silence. The room felt smaller. Or maybe he did. He packed away the letter, placed it inside a cigar box next to the carved wood necklace he'd bought her in Tunisia and the broken watch she once gave him for luck. Didn't attend the reception, didn't send a gift, didn't speak Caleb's name for a month. People in town avoided him. Not out of cruelty, out of pity. They watched him walk the streets like a ghost they didn't know how to greet. He took a job fixing tractors on the edge of town, kept his head down, hands busy. Some nights he drove past the old bookstore. The lights were always off. Emily no longer worked there. She had a new life now, a husband, a ring, a house near. The Creek. James saw her once more that winter in the grocery store parking lot. She was loading bags into the back of a silver sedan, alone. No wedding ring on her hand, just a thin gold chain around her neck. He didn't mean to stop. But she looked up, and their eyes met again. This time, she walked over. Hi, she said softly. He nodded. Hey, she looked older, not worn, but weathered. Like someone who'd seen too much and survived most of it. How have you been? She asked. He laughed once low, alive. I heard about your mother, she said. I'm sorry. Thanks. Silence stretched between them, heavy, familiar. I kept your letters, she said, almost a whisper. He didn't answer. She glanced back at her car, then up at him. Do you hate me? He shook his head slowly. No, I don't think I ever could. A pause. Did you love him? He asked out. Emily looked down, then back up. Not the way I loved you, but enough. He nodded once, then stepped back. Take care of yourself, Emily. You too, James. She watched him go, her breath forming soft clouds in the air. That night, he found a new letter on his porch. No envelope, no name. Just one line. If we'd been different people in a different time, maybe. He read it once, then burned it the next morning. Snow blanketed the town, clean, quiet, unforgiving. James stood outside his garage, watching the flakes settle on the roof. He pulled Emily's photo from his wallet, the edges curled and faded. Then, without thinking, he tore it in half. Not out of anger, out of mercy. He slipped the pieces into his coat pocket and turned back toward the door. Behind him, the wind carried the sound of church bells. Again. The boy's name was James, dark-haired, quiet-eyed, 5 years old, maybe 6. He had the kind of gaze that lingered too long, like he was always searching for something he didn't have the words to describe yet. The first time the older James saw him, the child was running through the town square, a half-eaten apple clutched in one hand, laughter trailing behind him like ribbon. Emily followed close behind, calling his name soft, patient. She looked the same. Or maybe James had memorized her too well to forget anything. It had been 2 years since the wedding. 2 years since she'd looked back at him on the church steps and walked away. Caleb was gone, now left 6 months after the ceremony. No one talked about why. He moved out west, took a job on an oil field, stopped sending letters after the 3rd month. Emily stayed, built a life without him. Without anyone, really. James had never asked for details. He didn't want to know what broke them, just that something had. Now, watching her lift the boy into her arms, spinning him once before settling him on her hip, he felt something ache deep beneath his ribs. Regret, maybe, or something older. They didn't speak that day. She didn't see him, or if she did, she pretended not to. But he saw enough to understand. The boy was his brother's by blood. but his name James wasn't. That night, he sat at his kitchen table, a single lamp casting long shadows across the floor. The house was too quiet. It always had been, but that night the silence pressed in harder. He pulled out the old wooden box again, the one with her letters, the necklace. The frayed snapshot of the two of them at the fall festival, all those years ago. She was smiling at him, off camera. He wasn't smiling at all, just looking at her like she was the only light in the world. Maybe she had been. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he walked through town with purpose. Not toward her, but toward the place where it all began, Baker's Brew. It had been remodeled, now with smooth countertops and mismatched chairs that tried too hard. But it still smelled like cinnamon and something older. He ordered 2 coffees. 2 sugars, no cream. Sat at the window where they used to sit. Watched the town move around him like it didn't know. He was there. Then he left 1 cup on the table. Walked away. He did it again the next week. And the week after that. On the 4th week, the cup was gone when he returned. And in its place folded napkin. Her handwriting. You still take it the same. He smiled, not with his mouth. Just his eyes. Weeks passed like that. Small things, a note, a flower, a photograph, no names. No expectations. Just moments slipped between the cracks of their separate lives. They didn't speak, not with words. But they started to remember each other. Then, one Saturday in late October, the town held its annual fall festival. Lights strung across Main Street. Hay bales lined the sidewalks. Kids with painted faces running between booths. Music from the same scratchy speakers as a decade ago. James hadn't planned to go, but something pulled him there. Something stubborn. He wore a faded blue shirt and clean boots. No expectations. He found her by the caramel apples, alone. The boy heard James was playing nearby, trying to win a stuffed bear at the ring toss. When she saw him, her breath caught. He nodded. She walked over. Didn't think I'd see you here, she said. Didn't think I'd come. She looked at him, really looked, not past him, not through him. At him. You look the same, she whispered. You don't, he said. You look like someone who's lived. Silence settled. Not awkward, just real. I named him after you, she said, eyes flicking toward the boy. I know. I thought maybe it'd help him be like you. He watched the child laugh, missing every ring toss but trying again anyway. He's got your courage, James said. She smiled. He's got your heart. They stood like that for a while, letting the music wrap around them, soft and distant. I never stopped loving you, she said suddenly. He didn't move. Just listened. I know, he said finally. Me neither. More silence, but I don't need it to be anything now, she added. Not more than it is. I just needed you to know. He nodded. I did. They didn't touch. Didn't make promises. But something settled between them, calm and true. The boy ran over, his cheeks red from the cold. Emily bent down to tie his shoelace. James knelt beside him. You any good at ring toss? He asked. The boy shrugged. Not really, James grinned. Good. That means you'll keep trying. The boy tilted his head. You sound like Mom. James met Emily's eyes. She's a smart one, he said. He stood, brushed off his hands. I should go. He said. She nodded. As he turned to leave, she called out softly, same time next week? He paused, smiled just slightly. I'll bring the coffee. That night, as lights dimmed across town and laughter faded into memory, James stood by his window, looking out at the darkened street. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was waiting. Not for her, not for answers. Just for morning, and that was enough.